Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Nerd to the Third Power, your one-stop shop for all things nerdy and awesome. I'm your host and master of ceremonies, Dr. Gonzo, and it looks like it's just a guys' night tonight. It's just you and me this week, Brian.
Woohoo!
All right, you know what that means? Hookers and blow! Which we don't
can't afford that, and you know it.
I can dream. But the day will come. All right. So, it's just the two of us this week. Kat has decided to sit this week out because she's not a huge Mortal Kombat fan, which is our discussion topic tonight. And Skyblaze is actually in the middle of moving house. So, we hope that we hope for the best for her for that. That all of her stuff arrives at her new place intact, and that she's able to get everything all unpacked and put out without a large stack of heavy boxes falling on her. So, yeah,
I think we'll be happy when she kind of moves in. I know she'll be happy when she moves in, and then she's going to be super happy because she'll be able to buy Sonic Mania and start playing it.
Oh God, she hates me right now. She absolutely hates me because
so it's a Tuesday.
Yep. She hates me right now because I stayed up late last night to buy it on the Switch, and I was posting on Facebook about how awesome it was. So I'm chalking up this burning sensation that I feel all over my body to the fact that she has made a voodoo doll and is burning me in effigy. So. All right, but anyway, we got a lot of show for you guys tonight. Like I said, we are discussing Mortal Kombat. This year is the 25th anniversary of the venerable fighting game series, so we're going to do sort of a look back, kind of a retrospective of the series and how it's impacted the video game history. But of course, there is procedure to follow, so we're going to begin really quick with Ask a Geek, and we got a couple questions here. First one here is from Charles, and it is for all of us. And he asks if we saw the DuckTales premiere this past weekend. So, Brian, I believe you said you caught it on YouTube.
Yeah. So in a wonderful, gesture. I'm not sure how wonderful it was. I heard that the creators actually had fight for it, but they released it's like the first two episodes, but obviously they're connected on free for YouTube. And I thought that was really cool in case people, missed it or what have you. So yeah, I was able to catch it there instead of on a live broadcast. So what I thought about it was I enjoyed it for what it was. It's both weirdly nostalgic, but also kind of new. All the characters are there, and they all, for the most part, have the same traits going for them that the old show had. But there's just a tinge of newishness. Things have been the nephews are kind of updated. They have a bit more distinct personalities as well as voices. Webby's a little bit different. Launchpad is still Launchpad, thank God. I was the one guy I was actually worried about. I'm a pilot. When did Launchpad become a pilot?
I tell you what, the casting of David Tennant as Scrooge, I was excited when it was first announced, just because I'm a big David Tennant fanboy. But after seeing him actually perform as the character, I've got to say that casting was inspired. I still hold Alan Young as being the definitive Scrooge McDuck, but David Tennant certainly knocked it out of the park with his own spin on the character. And as far as my thoughts on the show overall, it really feels a lot closer to the Carl Barks and Don Rosa Scrooge McDuck comics than it does to the DuckTales television series of the 80s.
Well, you could definitely tell that even with the opening and certain aspects of the artwork, you can see sort of the printer dots and stuff like that. So that's pretty much, I think that's what they're aiming for.
Yeah, well, I mean, not just in terms of the art style, but in terms of the story and the characterization. Scrooge is much more. What's the word I'm looking for? He's got a kind of a harder edge to him than he did in the 80s DuckTales series, and it's kind of the same edge that you see in the comics and the Barks and Rosa stories, which I thought was really cool. You have the overprotective Donald Duck, who's just really exasperated with Uncle Scrooge. Now, and on that note, I want to say I really want to know what happened that caused Scrooge and Donald to have a falling out, and I think it has something to do with the nephew's mother. I think that's kind of a neat aspect of it, is that
while I really did enjoy the 80s Disney afternoon cartoon version of it, it was at times very one and done. Here it looks like they're going for maybe a possible overarching storyline.
Yeah. My one real complaint that I have for what I've seen of the show so far is I don't like the design for Flintheart Glomgold.
The sort of short, stocky Scotsman.
Yeah, the fat Scotsman. Well, the thing is, like in the comics, I believe he was a Dutch Afrikaner. I don't think he was ever Scottish in the comics. I don't know. I'd have to ask our old friend Cabo about that one because he's a Don Rosa scholar. I think it was only in the DuckTales cartoon that Glomgold was actually Scottish. But no, yeah, I don't like the fat Scotsman look for Glomgold. You know what it reminds me of? The fat bastard from Austin Powers. I kept expecting him to look at one of the nephews and go, "Get in my belly,"
because he doesn't have a neck. Yeah, I can kind of see that. Though I did enjoy some of his more villainous, cartoony characterization. He's not just evil. I mean, yeah, he's evil Scrooge, but at least he's funny evil Scrooge.
Yeah. So. But yeah, I'm really excited to see where this goes. This show is definitely going to be on my television rotation for the future. Okay, well then, moving on to our next question, and this one is from Rachel, and it is for you, Brian. And she asks, "What is a comic series that you think would do well as a Netflix television show?"
Probably Moon Knight, to be honest with you. Moon Knight he's obscure enough that he's not known through a lot of people, but the bigger issue if he would be added to a movie or like a TV show, he would just be looked on as a Batman ripoff when he's not. I feel like Netflix could probably take him and kind of mold him like they molded Daredevil a little bit to make him his own sort of character again. So there's definitely Moon Knight. Weren't
there rumors floating around that they were either going to do a Moon Knight or they were considering a Moon Knight?
There might have been. There's a lot of characters that they're considering for stuff right now, especially since you have the Defenders coming out next week. So like that first sort of arc or that, I guess, phase or whatever of those shows is coming to a close. And then you have Punisher starting up, and then some of the season 2 or season 3. Yeah, to start up as well. So I think there was a discussion to add more characters to the roster. I just don't know where those discussions have gone. I'm not sure if they've stopped or maybe they've just said, all right, we need to put them on hold until we get this all straightened out and put together. Because you have to remember there was a lot of changes when the Inhumans was first a movie, canceled as a movie, and is now a TV show. So obviously things change, and when things change, it pushes back other projects.
Okay. What about non-Marvel properties? Any other comic series that you think might make a good Netflix show?
I would, honestly, I would be interested to see if someone would take up the mantle of Savage Dragon again.
Oh, wow. I think 3 people remember Savage Dragon.
Well, he's still, I mean, it has to be more than 3. The comic's still going. The only thing with that though, is I don't know what budget like a Netflix show has. And obviously a Savage Dragon show is going to be very practical effect heavy just on Savage Dragon himself. But we're also kind of getting that with that weird Netflix movie about Will Smith and the orcs and the orc cop or something like that. So I kind of look at that and went,
I'm sorry. Once more in my good ear, Will Smith and the orc cop.
Yeah. So it's a weird action fantasy film. I don't want to say action, but action drama, like fantasy film where elves and orcs exist in LA at like modern times, basically. And Will Smith character who's a cop gets partnered up with an orc cop and they're after a magic wand. I realize saying this out loud sounds stupid. I saw the trailer and I was like, all right, I might give you a chance.
Mike, did you put anything in Brian's coffee?
I don't drink coffee, you know that.
Okay. Well, that's interesting is the only word that I can really come up for that concept.
I can't remember the name of the movie though. That's the problem. I look up Orc Cop, maybe that'll pop up.
Orc Cop. Okay, all right, yeah. I tell you a comic series I think would be really neat if Netflix got a hold of it, and that's Jeff Smith's Bone. I would love for them to do an animated series based off of Bone. because that is, I mean, that's a story that they could get several seasons out of and have an overarching storyline that's already plotted out with a good beginning, middle, and end. And to see Jeff Smith's art animated up on screen is something that I've wanted for many, many years, because that man is like, I mean, I would hold him up there. I hold him up there with like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby as like one of the all-time great comic artists. Mm-hmm. I realize that that may offend you, Brian, because I don't know anything about who all the titans of comics are, but I hold Jeff Smith up as one of the greats, and I would love to see his work animated.
I'm not gonna say people like people things, and Jeff Smith is a good artist, so I'm not gonna be mad at you. Just don't call him the king of. No, you just don't call him the king of comics, and you're fine.
Yeah. If I call Rob Liefeld a Titan, then you might feel a kind of way about it.
Let's not open the can of worms, shall we?
That's discussion for another episode. All right. Well, that's about all the Ask Geek questions that we have for this week. Thank you, as always, for sending them in. As always, you can send them to us through the email at drgonzo@nerdtothethirdpower.com, or you can drop them in the YouTube comments below the feed. We do occasionally troll through the YouTube for questions. So, yeah, get your questions in, and you just might get yours read on the air.
Now that our Ask a Geek is over, we're going to move into our discussion topic, which we've already kind of mentioned before, and that is the 25th anniversary of the Mortal Kombat franchise. When it first... can you believe this whole series has made it 25 years? I know I can, because it has.
The evidence is self-explanatory. It certainly makes
that was also a super condescending entry line. I didn't know how to stop it, and I was like, all right, we're going full blast.
It also made me feel really fucking old, so fuck you for that.
Listen, it's only 25. So Mortal Kombat debuted, I was looking it up, October 8th, 1992. You don't want to talk about old, because I don't want to give away my age, but yeah, I was super young when this franchise debuted. I remember it debuting to a point. I don't remember it actually playing out in the arcades, but I do remember like when it came out onto consoles. But when I was in arcades and I did see it, I guess a good way of saying it, I was kind of blown away, because at the time, I didn't realize, you could make characters look almost real, because I didn't realize the technology was the technology that they were using being basically motion capture and stuff like that. Yeah. So like I was like, oh, that's so cool, as younger self says.
Yeah, I remember very clearly the first time I saw Mortal Kombat. I remember I was 6 years old, and there was a restaurant in Annapolis called Fuddruckers. And it's this kind of, one of those. It's almost like a step up from a Greasy Spoon diner, sort of. At least it was back then. It's had a remodel since then, but anyway. But they had.
Wait a minute, Fuddruckers is a franchise. You realize this, right? It was everywhere. Burger joint, and you would put your own.
Yeah, but Fuddruckers today is a very different beast from Fuddruckers 25 years ago.
Oh, everything's a very different beast.
Yeah, that's the
topic of this show.
It's had several remodels, so I'm providing the proper context.
Okay.
And at the one in Annapolis, over by the Annapolis Mall, there was a Fuddruckers, and they had this little arcade that had it had like 4 games. There was like a racing game, there was a crane machine, and then they had Mortal Kombat. And I remember going in there because my parents would give me, a few quarters to go play games while we waited for the food to arrive. And I saw someone. I was walking in the arcade. I hear this machine shout, "Finish him!" And I go and I look at it, and there's this guy playing it. And I remember very clearly he was playing a Scorpion, and he performed the Toasty fatality, where Scorpion rips off his mask, shows the skull face, and then blasts a fireball at his opponent and burns him to death. And that just completely changed my worldview on video games, because up to that point, the only games I'd ever played were like Super Mario Brothers or Duck Hunt. So I thought that was like the sum total of what video games were. So Mortal Kombat really opened my eyes to the possibilities of what video games could do. And it showed me that I was coming into a much bigger world than what I had originally imagined.
What's so for me now, it was kind of funny, is that I'm a huge Street Fighter fan. I'll always be a Street Fighter fan. And that was sort of the fighting game I would always be drawn to. And now you had this new fighting game coming out with characters who looked pretty real, and they were doing, let's just call it what it was, violent acts of murder. And you didn't notice that because like in Street Fighter, like you hit a guy hard enough, he might vomit. Like that's the most like violent thing you kind of see out of it. And also Street Fighter was a bit the sprites, so it looked a little bit cartoony when you compared the two of them. But to see like blood coming out, and obviously when people discovered the fatalities, the pit, and all those other things, we all sort of, I think everyone went a little wide-eyed a little bit at this game.
Well, and the extreme content was actually a direct response to Street Fighter 2, because the time Mortal Kombat had come out, Street Fighter 2 had been out for, I want to say, like 2 years, roundabout. So it was coming on 2 years, and had become very successful because it had introduced the multi-hit combo system. And it was one of the first fighting games to have colorful characters with different backstories. And when Ed Boon and John Tobias were coming up with the initial concept for Mortal Kombat, they were very canny. They knew that if they just came out with another game that relied on the multi-hit combo system, that they were just going to be seen as a Street Fighter ripoff. So they had to come up with some way to make their game stand out, and that's when they hit on the idea of like, well, let's just push this to its absolute illogical conclusion and just have our fighters killing each other. And so that's when they came up with all the really crazy finishing moves and the fatalities, and that over the top presentation combined with, as you mentioned, the graphics, which were taken from motion capture from actual actors and martial artists, not only caused Mortal Kombat to be very distinct from Street Fighter 2, but also kind of sort of elevated the fighting game genre as a whole.
There was a bit, and let's also not forget like their characters, and a lot of their characters were very tongue in cheek. You obviously had the Bruce Lee, and Johnny Cage was actually supposed to. Well, they asked Jean-Claude Van Damme to be a part of the game, and he turned it down. But Johnny Cage is obviously the Jean-Claude Van Damme of that game. And you have Raiden, which actually they took that straight from Big Trouble in Little China. The one of the big lightning, one of the guys with the hats that had lightning powers. And you had your two ninjas and things like that. So even if like we didn't know the backstories of these characters, they were like just familiar enough or cool enough that everyone sort of got behind one of them and was able to find like the one they liked.
That's one of the things that people tend to forget about the original Mortal Kombat, is that in many ways it was designed to be a spoof of the martial arts film and the fighting game genre. And you see that specifically in those character send-ups. And that was quickly abandoned with the sequels when the story of the overarching mythology of the series started to really crystallize. But we'll get to that when we get further down the road.
A little bit, because we were just talking about like the arcade. We're going to go back because this is also the time where it wasn't just arcades anymore. Arcades were still around. Maybe they weren't as prevalent, but they were still around. Then you had Mortal Kombat then saying they're going to enter into the console market. They're going to be a port from the arcade to the consoles, which brings us to Mortal Monday and their PR campaign. And I'm not sure we've seen a PR campaign quite like this before.
We have not. I have said many times. See, here's the thing. Here's the thing for you young bucks that are listening. Here's the thing you've got to understand about why Mortal Monday is so significant. Okay? Back in the 90s, the internet wasn't a thing. Okay? The only way that game news got out was either through the magazines or through television commercials. There was no internet. We didn't have game trailers. We didn't have, we weren't seeing video game ads played before major motion pictures. There would be times where you wouldn't even know that a game was being made until the day it was released. So Mortal Kombat has been out in the arcades for about a year, and Midway decides that they want to license the game for home release. But the problem is that by this point, the series had kind of started to be known for its violence, which we'll cover in more detail a little later. And the FCC actually came in and said that they couldn't show any of the fatalities or any of the blood in the commercials. So Midway basically came across this genius idea is like, look, people already know about us. We don't need to show them the game. They already know what we are. We just got to say that we're coming to the home consoles. And that's when they came up with what I think is the most brilliant piece of video game advertising ever made. And that's the Mortal Monday commercial, which you can look it up on YouTube, but it's literally the whole trailer is just this kid standing in the middle of a New York City street screaming Mortal Kombat, and you have all these people coming out of these buildings and swarming and forming a mob in the street and chanting the name. That's where you get the Mortal Kombat yell that you hear pretty much everywhere in Mortal Kombat music is from that commercial. And there's maybe, I think, a grand total of like 10 seconds of game footage, and it's all shown in brief, like half-second flashes. They didn't need to show a whole lot of the game because they were banking on people already knowing. They were literally selling the game on the name alone. And I have never seen a more effective piece of video game advertising in my life than that. When people ask me what is the gold standard of video game PR, that is it right there. And Mortal Kombat was ported to pretty much every console that was out at the time. I mean, it even got an MS-DOS and a PC Amiga port. And
no one knows going to know what Amiga is. Are you kidding?
Okay, when Skyblaze comes back, I'm just going to step back while she vivisects you for that, because the Amiga was huge in Europe.
The Amiga was huge in Europe. I understand that, but it's just funny to hear the name again.
So, but it was, I've never seen a piece of video game advertising as brilliant as that before or since. Unfortunately, with the coming of the home consoles, that's where things started to get kind of tricky.
Yeah, again, when we're talking about like a lot of the anniversary here of Mortal Kombat, like a lot of stuff that we talk about, we take for granted nowadays in the video game market, sort of kind of stemmed from what Mortal Kombat had done. So now Mortal Kombat by no means was like the first super violent video game.
Oh God, no. They were in the early 90s. See, when the Mortal Kombat, we like to call it the Mortal Kombat controversy, but there were really three chief players involved. Mortal Kombat was one. The other was Doom, which had also been released in 1992. And then the third game is a subject of some debate. But the one that I hear most often talked about is actually Night Trap, which got its own anniversary release earlier, just a couple weeks ago, funnily enough.
Which is really funny when you actually when you compare them, it's like, because Night Trap, I never played Night Trap, even though my brother and my family had a Sega CD. But like you watch it, and you would hear people like, this is so horrific. And then you watch it going, this is just badly acted.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we complain, now in the 2000s about people like Jack Thompson and Anita Sarkeesian and, talking about censoring games. These people are nothing new, and they were nothing new back in 1992 when Mortal Kombat first came out, because, before that you had games like Splatterhouse or Death Race, that had raised some eyebrows. But Mortal Kombat was the first time that the government stepped in and started holding congressional inquiries about video game violence. Because remember, this is still the age where video games were largely seen as children's amusements. You basically now have the equivalent of, an R-rated snuff film being put into, a video shelf alongside the Care Bears, as far as the world is concerned at this point.
Yeah. So the government now, actually, one of the people that I do remember the name of is Senator Joseph Lieberman, and I will not forget it, because there is a video clip of him somewhere that I saw where he was having the congressional meeting and he was talking to different people of the video game industry, developers, publishers, all these kind of people, and it said, you need to, get your, basically the line was, get yourself in order or we will, which is a huge threat. And knowing the government, and let's go even further back, because they've done this before with comic books and the whole witch hunt with comic books. It's the same story, but different characters.
And remember, this was also just a few years after, the 80s backlash against heavy metal music when what's his name? The Dee Snider from Twisted Sister had to testify before Congress about the content of his music. So this was, the same old song and dance. But something happened with the video game industry that we didn't really see happen with the music or the comic book industries. And that was that for the first time, all of the developers, the publishers, and the retailers, they all came together and they all sat down and they said, okay, look, we've got to get in front of this, because if the government starts putting down basically their own version of the Hays Code on us, then there's no way that any of us are going to be able to do anything.
Or survive.
Yeah. And that was when we saw the formalization of the Electronic Software and Ratings Board. Now, prior to that, there was no formal overarching ratings body. Sega would put their own rating system on their games, but they were really the only ones who were doing that. But it was with the formation of the ESRB where it was formalized, where there's kind of a formalized agreement that no retailer would sell any game that did not carry an ESRB rating. And the ratings were released to the public, and at the time you had K to A, kid to adult, which later became E for everyone. You had T for teen, which is for games that were marketed to people between the ages of 13 and 17. You had M for mature, which was pretty much the same as it is now for people 17 and up. And then you also had AO, which was adults only, which later became just A, and I think has been used a grand total of like 6 times.
There's not a lot of them out there for whatever reason. Just M takes over.
And since then, every game that has been released or has been re-released, because there have been some games that have been re-released that were initially released prior to the ESRB ratings. No major retailer, will sell any game that does not carry an ESRB rating. And this was enough to mollify at least the government, the congressional hearings. You still had the controversies because you had parents who would just ignore the rating system altogether. But now at least the game industry could go, okay, we warn you about what the content is in these games. Now the onus is on you to police what you are exposing to your children.
Right, and then that's just, I think, smart for them in any sense, because that way it's more along the lines of falls on the consumer and everything like that. Retailers possibly. I do have a story. It was a weird story. I actually got carded I got carded once in my entire life for a video game. Can you guess which one I got carded for?
What?
It was the orange box, which had Portal, Team Fortress 2, and Half-Life on it. I got carded for that at a Target.
Okay.
It was so strange because that's the only time it's ever happened. It might be the only time in history it's ever happened.
Do you think maybe that might be just because you look older than you really are?
They would card me if I looked older? Maybe. I don't know, but it was so strange.
Do you think maybe that's why you don't normally get carded?
Well, maybe it's
because I get carded even now, and I'm 30. Hell, I actually got insulted the first time I went to go buy a game and didn't get carded. It's like, you're not going to card me? Oh no, you we're not supposed to card anybody who looks under 30. You look like you're 30. It's like, no, motherfucker, you're looking at my ID. You are asking my ID. Do not fucking say that to me. You're looking at this. Look at it.
In a couple of years, when someone asks you that, you can be, oh, thank you. I get ulcers so often. If ever that does happen, I get super, super concerned. I'm like, why? What's wrong? But so it's interesting. So Mortal Kombat has that lasting legacy to go for it, which is hilarious when you think about it now. So if you kind of look back at Mortal Kombat, the very first one, and sort of and you compare it to, I guess, what games can do now, the violence seems almost silly and cartoony. Well, but hindsight's always 20/20.
Well, yeah, there's also the context of what was out at the time, because remember, this is 1992. You had the NES, you had the Sega Genesis, and then the Super Nintendo was just coming out that year. So games were still kind of in that early cartoony stage. Like I said, remember the popular perception. This is back in the day where people didn't say, "I'm going to play video games." It was, "I'm going to play Nintendo. I'm going to play Mario." There was the idea that video games could not only be marketed to a mature audience, but could be over the top with graphic violence was largely not in the public consciousness.
Very much, yeah, and even then, so when I remember this too, when the Mortal Kombat had come out to the consoles. Now, my brother, like I said before, he had a Genesis, so we got Mortal Kombat with blood. But people with SNES, they got Mortal Kombat with sweat. But then some rumors started circulating, like, oh, if you did something, maybe you can get some blood in the SNES. And this is like a fascinating subject for us about just, again, early pre-internet. How do rumors start with video games, basically?
And you know what? So much of that is attributed to Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat pretty much created the modern video game urban legend. The famous story that everybody knows is where in the first game, if you get 2 flawless victories, then perform a fatality on the pit when a witch flies across the moon, you get to fight Reptile, who was a hidden fighter. And, that was something that nobody had ever seen before. There weren't a whole lot of, there weren't a whole lot of hidden, bosses or characters in video games at that point, just because it really couldn't be done. So this was something that was just completely off the wall that nobody had ever seen before. And the sequels just ramped that up even more, And it was to the point where, especially with Mortal Kombat, people could make shit up just on the fly about, oh, if you do this, you can fight this, or if you do this, you can play as this hidden character. And people would believe it because what was already in the games, what was already confirmed to be true, was so wild and off the wall that you could come up with anything and have it be believable. And there were even instances where bugs in the game were believed to be intended by the creators as hidden characters. One of the ones that I distinctly remember was from the home consoles of the first game, where I think it was on the Super Nintendo version. If you met the requirements to fight Reptile during an endurance match, which is where you fought 2 opponents instead of just 1, then after you beat Reptile, the game would still be in an endurance match mode, and it would bring in a green-tinted version of one of the regular fighters. And there were all kinds of letters written to SWAT Pro, which was a spinoff of Game Pro at the time, about how, oh, I found these hidden fighters, these hidden characters, and here's how I did it. And, and people were trying to replicate this. And finally, Midway came out and said, no, that's not something we intended. That's just a bug in the game code.
Right, but at the same time, it's like, wow, this is really cool. Look what I found.
Yeah.
And then some of those little things became character, like Ermac. I remember Ermac sort of showing up because apparently, like, he actually represented something in one, like, a menu somewhere. And people were like, oh, who is Ermac? How do I fight Ermac? And they're like, hey, here's Ermac. And then a later game, he's a red ninja.
Yeah, Ermac came from the error macro count in the debug menu of, I want to say, the first game, and people thought that was a hidden character. So so that was the kind of thing that these games were inspiring, just because, again, like I said, what was already in there was so off the wall, anything could be believable. I'll tell you one of the ones that I remember very distinctly came from one of the sequels. That was Mortal Kombat 3, and that was the concept of a character being permanently unlockable, and that was with Cyber Ninja Smoke, who, if you punched in a button combination to a specific screen, you could actually unlock him as a playable character on the arcade machine, and he would be permanently unlocked. And there was all kinds of uproar raised in the magazines at the time, because this was something that nobody had ever seen before. I mean, before MK3 came out, there were games where you had hidden fighters who performed some trick, but they would be like, either hidden bosses that you couldn't play as yourself, or they'd be, characters that you could play once and then you'd have to punch in the code again to play as them again. So the idea of a permanently unlockable fighter on an arcade machine, no less, was absolutely mind-blowing.
Truth, I even forgot, because I knew of Smoke. I didn't realize he was permanently unlockable. It's how long I've played, like, Mortal Kombat 2 and or 3. And speaking of those sequels, is that, it's always a fear when a game becomes popular or any sort of franchise becomes popular and they move on to the second version of it. Like, will it be as good as the first one? Will it be the one that surpasses it, or is it going to be a possible killer to the whole thing? And Mortal Kombat 2, I think they played it. I think for the franchise when they first started, I felt like they played it right. So second game comes out. It's it's just a little bigger. You have a little bit more characters, a little bit more detail, and fatalities maybe upped ramped a little bit, but nothing to the point of like it oversaturated its own market. It was just enough that you enjoyed it again.
Well, I mean, you pretty much summed up the philosophy behind Mortal Kombat 2, which was just more characters, more hidden moves, more fatalities, more hidden secrets to find. And that was the point where going back to the urban legends thing, that was the point where things kind of started to crystallize with the Mortal Kombat franchise. That was where the overarching mythology of the series was introduced in the form of Shao Kahn and the tournaments in Outworld. You started to see, more hidden characters, and you started to see the creators were kind of just a little nutty, because I remember you had that was the game that introduced the friendship finishing moves,
right? Yeah,
and then you had I think it was John Tobias who would occasionally show up and go toasty when you performed a really kind of brutal uppercut.
Yeah, that was happening, and then a little bit later on, you had the beastalities, and then the babyalities, and like they're just all sorts of just wacky things sort of happening.
Yeah, so with 2 and 3, you started to realize that the creators were just a little bit nutty. But you know what? That silliness, it still kind of fit in with this series because it was, it could juxtapose that moment where you have this grim, dark storyline about, extra-dimensional war being fought with a martial arts tournament, and then next thing you know, you have, Scorpion turning his opponent into a baby. And it just somehow fit. And, you had kind of that same philosophy with Mortal Kombat 3, which was just more of everything. Although they did shoot themselves in the foot with the first release of Mortal Kombat 3, where they removed fan favorite characters like Scorpion and Reptile in favor of new characters that, weren't really received all that well. And that's actually one of those times that's actually one of the few times outside of Street Fighter 3 where a whole new version of a game has been released just to address criticisms of his initial release, with Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 in, I want to say, 1994 or 1995, which brought back those missing characters, as well as introduced, again, just more hidden stuff to find. And these are the games that also had like pre-match codes. Like if you do the screen when they do like the big versus screen, which was a loading screen, each person could hit buttons and move their joystick, and they can change the little icons at the bottom, and maybe you get like big head mode or something happens, or like instant death, something ridiculous would happen. So like it's this weird extra mini game on top of this game. I've never been able, when I was in the arcades, ever to figure out what code did what. And I didn't have the time and the effort to research it, to be honest with you. I completely forgot about, again, there's a lot of things I forgot because when I played Mortal Kombat 1 and 2, I started kind of leaving the series after Mortal Kombat 3 or so, and haven't really returned back to it. But the 90s Mortal Kombat, you could not get away from it. They, like, in terms of just pop culture, Mortal Kombat was there up with everything else, not only in just video games, yet other media. Oh God, no! Like the two that everyone, the two things that everybody about Mortal Kombat in the 90s are, of course, video games, and then you have the movies. But there was so much else out there. It was a merchandising juggernaut. You could find just about any facet of pop culture. There was something Mortal Kombat for it. There were action figures. There were two television series, one of which was an animated cartoon, which I remember being kind of crap.
It was very boring for a show called Mortal Kombat because, unfortunately, it was a Saturday morning show.
Yeah,
it couldn't do what Mortal Kombat is known for.
There were comic books. The video games would flash on a screen an address that you could send like $3 to and get an official Mortal Kombat comic book, which I have both the ones for Mortal Kombat 1 and 2 packed away somewhere. I still have those comics. I wonder if they might be worth anything nowadays. Fucking Pogs. I don't know if anybody remembers Pogs, but I have to this day a 24-karat gold-plated Mortal Kombat Pog Slammer. It's still in its original packaging. My mother got it for me which I thought was strange because she absolutely hated Mortal Kombat, refused to let me play the game. But I just remember just being struck at how random a piece of merchandise this was. A Mortal Kombat Pog Slammer. You know, there were action figures. There's a rumor that there's a novelization of the first game that was released, but I've never been able to run down a copy in the wild.
I've never been able to see that well. And also, something I've mentioned on the show before, there was a live action touring show that I went to go see.
That I didn't know about.
Yeah, there was a live action Mortal Kombat touring show, and it was a collection of a lot of martial artists, real martial artists, who were dressed up as the characters. They would have a big sort of stage stunt show kind of thing going on. It was cheesy. It was kind of strange. It's hard to really describe. Very much just, hey, it was the sign of the times and stuff like that. Oddly enough, a lot of those martial artists ended up on another Saturday morning show called WMAC Masters, which is kind of hilarious. Like the guy who did the motion capture for Liu Kang ended up on that show, and I thought that was kind of funny. And that show referenced it because every so often he will like jump up and do like the bicycle kick, but he had to be like holding on to something.
You want to know the one piece of Mortal Kombat merchandise that I like to bring up that I actually had, but nobody else remembers? The trading card game.
Did they actually make a trading card game? But I don't have trading cards.
No, there was a Mortal Kombat trading card game.
Interesting.
And it was out for like a year. It had characters from Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. You'd pick a character, then you had to build a deck with like various fighting moves, and the rules were fucking ridiculous. We could never figure out how the hell initiative worked. But like, there was a Mortal Kombat trading card game, and that's actually the very first trading card game I ever played before I played Magic or the Star Wars customizable card game that came out, I think, a year later. It was the Mortal Kombat trading card game.
That's kind of funny.
And then there was a music album. There was the Mortal Kombat soundtrack album that had like themes for every character, and it was so like outside of the main theme for the Mortal Kombat franchise, all the music on there was just so fucking cheesy. Like the theme for Scorpion had this guy that sounded like he'd, taken a few too many shots to the gym. He's going like, lost soul bent on revenge, over and over. It was the most cheesy fucking pre-EDM techno shit that you'd ever heard. But like people ate this up.
It's so strange because my joke for a lot of this is, Mortal Kombat insert techno music. Because this is where like I discovered techno music was through mostly the movies, just like this, the electronic and all this kind of other stuff like that. And that's now, those two things. Like, could we have would people know techno music without Mortal Kombat? Will people know Mortal Kombat without techno music? The world will never know.
So. But I mean, like it was, and again, it started a very heated rivalry between the Mortal Kombat the Mortal Kombat series and the Street Fighter series. And again, going back to what's already out there is so strange that anything you make up could be believable. There was rumors flying around for years that there was going to be a Mortal Kombat versus Street Fighter crossover game made, which never happened. But I'd have been interested to see it happen. Although Mortal Kombat did have a crossover game in its series, but we'll get into that down the line.
A little bit, because we're getting towards the end of the 90s era and more into the 2000s, where there is a saying that there is too much of a good thing. And man, did we get a lot of Mortal Kombat. And man, that might have been a bit too much for a good thing, because we started to get a lot of the game still continued. But then you started to get a lot of other different things, a lot of other different games. They try to branch out. Two big spinoffs, like the mythologies of Sub-Zero. Actually, and it's like Special Forces. These not fighting games, but have characters from Mortal Kombat in them, doing like action games and stuff like that. There's a third one, Shaolin Monks, which is a bullshit game because it's a 2-player game with 1 life bar. Bullshit.
Well, yeah, Mortal Kombat really suffered once we entered into the 2000s and started entering into 3D games. And the problem was they hit what can be called the polygon ceiling. See, the thing about the games in the 90s, Mortal Kombat 1, 2, 3, and Trilogy, was that the sprite the digitized sprites had enough detail that you could pull off really over the top finishing moves and have them look gruesome, have them look gross, and essentially look believable. But then when you look at the 3D graphics of the early 2000s, like the worst of the bunch, I would say, is Mortal Kombat 4 on the PlayStation, where you have characters who look like they're made out of painted building blocks, and it suddenly became very hard to make those fatalities believable because again, it looked like you were just playing with action figures. And again, going back to what you said about being too much of a good thing, Midway still was kind of under the impression that Mortal Kombat was still, sort of the king of the heap as far as violent games went, when in fact, we'd had so many different M-rated game franchises come out, games like Quake, Half-Life, Counter-Strike, Resident Evil, I think Metal Gear Solid had come out, that at this point, Mortal Kombat just started to look cartoony, and their solution to all that was always the same. It's just, more, crank it to 11, crank it to 12, just add more, just make it more and more and more, to the point where Mortal Kombat almost became a parody of itself. And there was a stretch of time in the mid-2000s, early to mid-2000s, where, we complained about Call of Duty or a new Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed coming out every year. Mortal Kombat was doing the same thing in the early to mid-2000s. We were getting a new Mortal Kombat game every year. Whereas a franchise like Street Fighter would, kind of marinate for a few years, let the fan base build up before they come out with a new game. There was also the fact that Mortal Kombat just wasn't unique as a fighter anymore. We started to see other fighting games come out, games like Guilty Gear, Dead or Alive, King of Fighters, were starting to make their names. So it wasn't, there was more competition on the board than just, Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. And so, yeah, the series really kind of suffered in the 90s, where Midway just kind of sort of, couldn't figure out what to do next with the franchise.
Yeah, and it was sort of a running, I felt that when I fell off the series, I think a lot of people also fell off the series. The question of going to 3D, was it worth it or not? Everyone else was going to 3D. You bringing up the fact that we have different fighting games coming out. The palette's changing. The players are looking for something a little bit new and special, and they sort of weren't bringing it to the table at any time soon. And it was a problem and I think the overall, depending on how you feel about it, the problem, I would say the end result came from Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe. Cause that was the last one that came out in 2008. And after that, it took them about 2 to 3 years before they made another game.
I think it was like 2007, wasn't it?
It was probably 2007, 2008.
Yeah, I remember being really excited about Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe, and I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna," the image that everybody remembers from the PR is the stare down between Sub-Zero and Batman. But then, of course, the reality has to hit when DC comes along and says, "Okay, remember, Batman doesn't kill, so you couldn't see Superman blowing up Lex Luthor with his laser eyes. You just had heroic brutalities where he just punches him a lot."
But not only that,
although I will say this, Joker's pop gun fatality in that game was inspired. I was so pissed they censored it.
Yeah, it was the heroes couldn't quote unquote kill, so they had brutalities, but at the same time, a lot of those brutalities would end up the person dying. Because I remember I would play as Green Lantern, and his was he would put him in a green ball, and then the green ball would shrink really quickly. And they're like, "Oh, he's just knocked out." I'm like, "No, I'm pretty sure all of his bones are crushed."
He's atomized now.
Yeah,
he's a seasoning. You could sprinkle him on your sauce.
Yeah, it was just I'm pretty sure he's dead. So yeah, and there was a lot of that, and a lot of that came because it was not only just a crossover between two franchises, two companies working together, different philosophies, different what they wanted. Censorship definitely came into play there, where the camera would kind of pan awkwardly to one side. So.
Well, the series had already hit critical mass by that point with Mortal Kombat Armageddon, which had literally every single fighter who'd ever appeared in the franchise all in one game. I think it was 60 plus fighters, and people just looked at it and went, "No, this is too much."
So I would, but even then, I would consider like they made this, and I think this is where they're like, all right, we need to take a break, reformulate, find out what we've been doing wrong, and then try again.
Well, here's the thing: is after Mortal Kombat versus DC Universe came out, Midway actually shut down and had to sell off the rights, which were purchased up by Warner Brothers. And a lot of people who were working on the Mortal Kombat franchise at that point went to go work for Warner Brothers under NetherRealm Studios. And then the next game that came out after Mortal Kombat versus DC came out in 2009, and that was the officially it's just titled Mortal Kombat, but the fan base likes to call it Mortal Kombat 9 because it was the ninth main game in the series. And they did something that I thought was really, really clever with Mortal Kombat 9, and that's they took everything back to basics. And it was really kind of an opportune time to do it, too, because 3D graphics had evolved to the point where you could get that sense of gruesome, believable realism out of the special moves and the fatalities and still kind of do things sort of over the top. But Mortal Kombat 9, like I said, it took everything back to basics. It was basically, the story was basically a retelling of the original 90s trilogy. You had a decent selection of fighters, special moves, fatalities, and that was it. Just a straight up, there weren't a whole bunch of different mini games and crazy other bullshit. They didn't have the stupid watered down creative fatality. It was basically what you would get if you had made the original Mortal Kombat game in the late 2000s. And it was extraordinarily well received, not just by longtime fans of the series, but also by a bunch of new fans as well. And it was great to see that come back. And they did something that was also very smart after that came out, which was they stopped, put it down, they stepped back, and they just took a break. They didn't immediately start running on a new game that's going to come out the next year. I think it was like it was like what, 5 years or so before Mortal Kombat X came out 2 years ago.
There was a developmental period for the game, basically. So yeah, you're correct. It took about 5 years, and at the same time, though, they were also half the studio was also working on the Injustice fighting game series. So having like two projects running at the same time probably benefited them, because they would go, all right, Mortal Kombat's done, we'll work on Injustice, let Mortal Kombat just sit and relax, and then we'll come right back to it when we finish Injustice. Okay, Mortal Kombat X is done, we'll go to Injustice 2. So like as a studio, I feel like they've balanced themselves very well. True, they're good at one thing, but hey, that one thing's pretty good.
Well, part of it is they didn't release Mortal Kombat X until the technology had evolved to the point where they could make it distinct from Mortal Kombat 9.
Right.
And again, they kept everything basic. They didn't have more fighters than they needed to tell their story. They kept it basic to, special moves, fatalities, not a whole bunch of extraneous bullshit. And they kept things basically simple. They didn't do the whole, okay, more is more is more is more, like they did in the 2000s. And I feel like that is why those two games have been successful, is because they did what they did in the 90s, which is they stopped and they took their time to not only add new stuff, but refine what's already there. Whereas in the 2000s, they were kind of just throwing Mortal Kombat at the wall and seeing what stuck.
Yeah, and just hoping everyone would still sort of come back to it. So yeah, lessons were learned. Sometimes we don't get that in the video game industry. Sometimes they just continue to make the same ones or brand new ones. But no, it seems like the lessons have been learned, at least for NetherRealms for a while now. But so that's the thing. So with these, we only have like two, I would guess, modern Mortal Kombat games out right now. And I haven't heard anything about a new one anytime soon. But we can assume they're probably thinking about it and probably working on it right now. So where do you see, so we had, the great highs, the lows, and sort of a resurgence now, but where's the series at? Where is the series today? Is it going back to its roots, the good thing, or is it just going to be, we're going to start like losing interest again?
I can tell you, as far as the story, NetherRealm is actually taking great care to make sure that the overarching mythology maintains a coherency. Mortal Kombat X was largely a retelling of Mortal Kombat 4 in a way that, basically wasn't bullshit. And we've had the return of Dark Raiden, so we're gonna probably the next game is gonna re-explore some of the storylines that occurred in the 2000s. As far as development, I would say we could the absolute earliest I would say that we would hear about a Mortal Kombat sequel would probably be maybe a year or so after the release of Injustice 2, which has that come out already? Or?
That I believe it has come out. So it's come out this year, to my knowledge. So you're probably looking maybe sometime next year, or maybe even a little bit after that for an announcement. And
that will just be based on what's happened in the past. That'll be just an initial announcement that, hey, we're working on it. Yeah, May 2017 was when Injustice 2 came out. So just this past May. So, and that'll be just an announcement that they're working on it. They're not going to show us. I don't think that they're going to have anything to show us with that initial announcement. I don't think that they're going to have like a whole bunch of trailers. I think that they're really going to stop and take their time with Mortal Kombat X1, X2, whatever. XI. What's the Roman numeral for 11?
It is XI.
So, I'll tell you what, though, I really hope that they, for their PC version, at least for the next game, they don't do what they did with the Steam release for Mortal Kombat X, because that was just an unmitigated disaster.
Well, there's been a lot of those lately, and probably not going to slow down anytime soon. I hate to burst your bubble about that. I don't know why it's a problem. That's probably a discussion for another day. But yeah, it's been a problem.
Here's the thing. On paper, it was a great idea. They were doing what they were calling a streaming install, which was basically the game would download itself in chunks, and you could play with the content that came in those chunks while the rest of the game downloaded and installed. So you didn't have to wait until this whole 30 gigabyte file. This whole 30 gigabyte game was installed before you could play the game. But what happened was, when the release time came, the only thing that they streamed out and made available at first was just the main menu. There was literally no other content that started coming out until I think 12 hours after the release. And even then, you had no control over what you got in what order. So if you wanted to play, like me, if you want to just kill time on single fight with Scorpion until the rest of the game installed, you better pray he was in one of those first few chunks, or otherwise, you're going to be waiting a while.
Right, just like, I don't want to play as Liu Kang. I always went for Sub-Zero myself, but that's just me. I like Blue.
And the fan base for Mortal Kombat is interesting, because while it's never reached the same heights that it had, the same numbers that it had in the 90s, the fan base that's has remained very passionate and very enthusiastic about the franchise. So I think that as long as that fan base remains, I don't think Mortal Kombat is going to be going away anytime soon. I think we can expect to see another 25 years out of this franchise.
I agree with that. I think that's what we'll do. And every so often, it does seem to peek into other media. We did have that web show for a small little bit. There was rumors.
2 weeks.
It was all, hey, 2 weeks isn't better than nothing, right? It was an interesting web show. I think it's on Blu-ray now. There was rumors of a new movie, but I think that got kiboshed a couple of times because they couldn't find, unlike in the 90s, where it was like, yes, make the movie and go. They couldn't find the right actors or directors or whatever, and they said, all right, put it on the shelf. Let's sit for a while. We don't necessarily want to make a bad movie again. Mortal Kombat. What was it? It wasn't Armageddon. What was it? What was the second movie again?
I think it actually was Armageddon.
Was it Armageddon? Mortal Kombat Armageddon? Good Lord, that film.
Let me
Good Lord. I saw that in theaters. Of course, I saw the first one in theaters too.
Okay. Let me look, because now you got me curious here. Annihilation.
No, it was Annihilation. Yeah, it started with an A. I remember it started with an A.
No, Armageddon was the second to last game published by Midway.
Right. So like I said, lessons maybe have been learned, and that's good for them. That only means that hopefully a good product down the road. But let's stick with video games, guys, because this is where I really want to see Mortal Kombat grow. As sure, a movie would be good, but we got one that was okay. Let's just stay there. All right. So that's sort of it right now. I mean, we've had a wonderful discussion about Mortal Kombat. I'm going to leave you all. Like I said, my favorite character was Sub-Zero. Before we go, I think we need to answer that question. So, Gonzo, before we go, what was your favorite character of Mortal Kombat? Or who is your favorite character?
Oh, Scorpion, hands down.
So you like Scorpion, I like Sub-Zero. How are we friends?
I don't know. It looks like we'll have to settle this in Mortal Kombat.
All right, I'll get my techno music. In the meantime, I hope everyone everyone's enjoyed this episode, Nerd the Third Power. Don't forget to subscribe down at the bottom. Leave a comment about any Mortal Kombat memories that you have, anything we might have missed. And there you go. We hope to see everyone here again next time. Next week, we'll be talking about Netflix Defenders. It is Netflix's Avengers. All these different shows that Marvel has been putting out on Netflix are finally coming together in a team up. And hopefully they all beat the crap out of Iron Fist. But that's just what I wish for.
All right. Yeah, that's all the time they have for. Thank you as always for tuning in. We'll see you next week. As always, I'm Dr. Gonzo.
I'm Brian.
You're not stealing my line this week. Taka, play us out.